Hey man, I have a question for you about what's going on in Palestine. Okay, shoot, what's your question? Okay, well, I understand that like the Israeli government is doing a lot of really messed up stuff, but like, do you condemn? No. Okay, well, what do you mean no? Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. I think an explanation might be necessary there. So, to start, a question. Have you ever in your life lived in a concentration camp? Well, no. I haven't. Okay, and at any point have you lived a decade and a half of your life under total colonial subjugation, under a total air, land, and sea blockade that has stopped you from getting even basic necessities? Also, no. No, I haven't. Okay, well, like, I haven't either, right? I have the luxury of living fairly comfortably in the Imperial Core, and I've never had to live under those circumstances ever in my life. Okay, well, what does that have to do with the question I asked, though? Well, maybe a question for you, right? If you were living in those circumstances hypothetically, would you do everything you could to resist those circumstances, to break free of that oppression? I like to think I would. I feel like the other option's not great. Right. I feel like most of us feel that way, where we wouldn't want to put up with that kind of oppression, right? We would resist that kind of oppression in all forms by any means necessary. There's this old quote from a provisional chief of the IRA back in the day that says that most revolutions are not caused by revolutionaries in the first place, but by the stupidity and brutality of governments. Okay, well, like we were talking about Palestine. Why are we quoting the IRA? I'll get into that in a second, but I think it's a good quote to sit on, right? It's that violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's driving factors of that. In a colonial context, right, that violence is really driven by the violence of the colonizer. Colonized violence, this liberatory violence, this resistance to colonization, and in the Palestinian context, the annihilation of the Palestinian people is a response to a stimulus, that stimulus being colonization. It's not just happening because Palestinians are like violent inherently or want to just kill people or whatever. But couldn't they just protest peacefully or at least try other means? Yeah, but Palestinians have tried that, especially in the Gazan context, right? A few years back, you had the whole March of Return thing going on, which was basically a giant protest where Palestinians would march up to the wall that was separating Gaza from the rest of the land and would, protest its existence, protest the blockade, protest being penned into a concentration camp. And you know what Israeli soldiers did in response to that? No, but I assume it wasn't nice. Not at all. Yeah, they killed hundreds of them, injured thousands. They targeted press, medical staff, ambulances, things like that. It was really, really genuinely horrific. Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't know that. And that peaceful response, by the way, was happening again after years of established Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip. These indiscriminate bombing campaigns that targeted places like schools, residential buildings, water sanitation facilities, things like that. Yeah, but like violence predates, I think, the blockade, right? Yeah, Zionist settler colonialism goes back to like the 1880s, right? But the official establishment of what we know today as like the Israeli project was in 1948, and every single year in that entire period has been marred with violence against Palestinians. Like, what kind of violence are we talking about? Well, just from 1947 to 1949, upwards of 750 to 800,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from upwards of 530 cities, towns, and villages. That area, that territory that was ethnically cleansed, depopulated, is what we now know today as Israel, right? It's no surprise that a lot of the settlements and areas that were attacked on October 7th were themselves atop the ruins of ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages, right? It's a really nasty dynamic, and you can't understand Israel without understanding this legacy of brutal colonial violence. Okay, so you keep saying colonial violence. Is that kind of why you're referencing like the IRA? Yeah, exactly, right? Because for me, when I hear someone saying, do you condemn Palestinian resistance today, I think of people asking, well, would you condemn the ANC in South Africa? Would you condemn the FLN in Algeria? Would you condemn the IRA in Ireland? And my answer to that would be the same as now, which is no. They are fighting brutal colonial oppression, and the violence that stems from that on both sides is the fault of the colonial power. But this isn't to say that like you like the violence or you enjoy the violence, right? No, of course not. In my ideal world, there isn't violence, right? In my ideal world, people don't have to rise up violently to protect themselves and stave off their own annihilation. But in the Palestinian context, Palestinians have been brought to that point by their colonizers, right? The violence of the colonized is really a boomerang effect from the violence of their colonizers. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. And Palestinians, when they resist violently, are doing so after decades upon decades of violent colonial subjugation. So the end of the violence then, from what I'm gathering, in your opinion, would only be brought with the end to the colonization of historic Palestine. Right, yeah, exactly. The violence ends, the resistance ends with the end to settler colonialism in historic Palestine. That is how you break the cycle. Okay, I guess I kind of see where you're coming from there. Yeah, and it's notable too that when we ask questions like this of like, do we condemn X group, right? That we're not oftentimes asking, do we condemn the decades and decades and decades of Zionist settler colonialism that got us to this point? It's really noticeable to me when someone asks, well, do you condemn Palestinians, but doesn't ask, do you condemn Israel? It doesn't ask supporters of the Israeli project whether or not they condemn the actions both today and historically of the Israeli government. I mean, yeah, that's fair. It does kind of seem like a double standard. Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is. The colonized are oftentimes held to a much higher standard than that of their colonizers. That's been true throughout history, right? And it's why, like, every decolonial struggle, every resistance organization has at some point been labeled either savages or terrorists by their colonial occupiers. Hmm. Well, I appreciate you kind of answering that question then. That was an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, of course. No worries, man. Free Palestine. Yeah, free Palestine.